Okay. Hi, Andrea. How are you?
Hi, Douglas. I'm great. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
So, you're an author. Losing the Light, She Regrets Nothing, We Came Here to Forget, and a novella called Broken Bay. And your latest book is called Women Are the Fiercest Creatures. Have you been a published author your whole life as a career, or have you done something else before that?
Well, my first book, Losing the Light, came out, 7 years ago in 2016. So the last 7 years of my life that's been a big part of my work. And before that, I was working in publishing since really the start of my career. But I definitely wanted to be a published author my whole life. So
Oh, so
yes, I have been writing and storytelling for a long time.
okay, but before that you were publishing, so you were still in the same business basically, just a different
Yeah,
part of it.
that was
Yeah.
that was what I did right after college, and then until I sort of stepped away from that part of my work a couple of years ago.
Okay. What genre would you put your books in? Are they all different, or are they one similar, same genre?
I would probably say they're in the same genre. I think genres are a little tricky if you get outside of the genres that have really strong conventions. If you're talking about romance, which has about a million subgenres, or sci-fi or horror, or there are some things that stick really, it really firmly into the conventions of a certain genre, and then there's kind of everything else. So I'm a little bit in the everything else category, but I always describe my work as a lot of my books are family dramas, certainly the last three, this one coming up in the previous two. And I always like to think of them as being, fast paced, with kind of a hint of psychological thriller. I don't think they're out and out thrillers, but I like to think they're, if you like sort of plot driven, page turny books, then I think that you will like my work. So beyond that, they're contemporary fiction. But yeah, it's that's how I would describe the genre of my book.
Well, you're right about genres. I mean, back in the old days, there were five genres. Now there's about 5,000. And
Yeah.
I think as self-publishing became a big thing, people started just creating their own genres.
Yeah, which I think is so interesting. I mean, I think self-publishing really gave rise to the niche genres and the way that they sort of, subgenre and subgenre. So if you look at the way, romance readers in particular talk about genres again, which I think is just such a fascinating sector of the industry, you have romance, and then you have dark romance, and then you have, dark paranormal romance, and then, I mean, yeah, just kind of on and on and on. And I think it's so interesting the way that they just, you can have these like niche books that are, still find a great audience online, which is amazing.
Well, it seems to me, again, this is traditional, but with traditional publishers, they kind of like to keep an author who is successful with them in the same genre because they know they can sell that. Where I think some authors, maybe they get tired of writing in one particular genre and they want to do something else. They've always been discouraged by the publisher. Now, I'm not saying that happens as much anymore, but in the old days, yeah. They say, no, 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 no. You write romance, that's what you do, stick with that because that's how we make our money. But I think it's changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I do think that that's an important part of, you want to sort of have a brand as an author, and you want to let readers know what they can expect from you. And I think, if people look forward to your books because it hits a certain sweet spot, then you want them to keep looking forward to them for that reason. But I also think that readers, sometimes we don't give, publishers don't give readers enough credit, that readers can like all different kinds of things. And I know very few people that only read one genre. So I always think it's really exciting when writers move around genres, and really, when I think about like writers like Margaret Atwood, or Jonathan Lethem, or some of these people that really, they'll write some sci-fi here and they'll write contemporary fiction there, and I think that's really exciting. And I actually hope to do that at some point in my career. I don't think that I'll only ever write contemporary fiction, but that's just what I've wanted to write so far.
So, how many books do you write in a year? Do you have a schedule, or do you just sort of write when the mood hits you?
I mean, I have a schedule in terms of that I write. I try and write every day when I'm working on a book. But for me, again, not being in those sort of, I'm not a book a year author. You see authors that really get on that schedule of, of having a book a year, and I always think that's amazing. But I've every book that I've written has taken a different amount of time to write, both because the book had different requirements and because of, what else was going on in my life. I have two very small children at the moment, so that has definitely dictated some of my career stuff. But yeah, I mean, it really, like, I think keeping a regular practice is really important, but I also think that, some books really benefit from having more time or going in a drawer for a while and coming back out. And so, my first book, I worked on it on and off for more than 10 years. Some of my books have taken a lot less time than that to write. This one took a few years. This one went through a lot of drafts. This one that's coming out next week. And so, yeah, I think it's sort of like, how long does it take to write a novel? However long it takes you to write that novel.
Has there ever been a time where you got up and you sat down at the computer to write and you had nothing to say?
No, I don't think that really ever has been my problem. I think that there are definitely times when I'm not as good at keeping to my routine, just because, again, life happens. And certainly after college, I was a writing major in college, and you have a lot of structure when you're in a writing program in school. And then figuring out how to write in the real world with a job was a challenge. But I think once I sort of figured that out. No, I mean, I don't think it's usually a problem that I don't have anything to say. And I tend to, when I'm writing regularly and when I'm working on a project, I tend to think about it sort of off and on all day. And so, I sort of am doing that kind of writing while I'm trying to fall asleep at night or out walking my dog or what have you. And so usually by the time I'm actually sitting in front of my computer, I have like the last 24 hours of ideas have sort of built up in my head. So that's not usually the challenging part. I think the challenging part is just the getting there to your desk and sitting in front of your computer to do it.
So the story is running in your head basically continuously in one way or
Yeah.
another. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's pivot over to your latest book, Women Are the Fiercest Creatures. Give us a quick synopsis of it, just kind of an overview of what it's about.
Sure. So, Women Are the Fiercest Creatures is the story of a charming, manipulative tech CEO who is about to take his social media company public. And just as he's preparing to do that, the three most important women in his life converge, and his past comes back to haunt him. So, this is his new wife, who is pregnant with her first child, his ex-wife, Anna, who is the mother of his two boys and was very instrumental in him building the company, and his ex-girlfriend, Sam, who is also a mom and who helped him invent the company, though her contributions have gone unacknowledged. So all three of these families' lives really converge in, throughout the course of the book. And so it is what comes of all that.
Was that tech CEO based on anyone?
Not in particular. Although there were definitely people that I was thinking of when when I was writing this book. And I think more broadly, I was just thinking about the way that we talk about male CEOs in particular, but a couple of them that really came, that really were sort of on my mind while I was writing this book are Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. Both are sort of have famously complicated relationships as, fathers, but mostly people talk about their work. And I just think that's so interesting, because if a woman had a complicated relationship with her children and was that famous, you would just never hear about anything else. And so I think it's really interesting how we talk about those men as fathers. And so that was definitely something that was on my mind while I was writing the book. But that character is not based on either of those guys. He's sort of a different, he really paints himself as a feminist and a good dad, and says those things are sort of really important to him. And I think that's sort of something you see a lot now, is people sort of performing that role. So that was what I was thinking about when I was writing Jake.
I don't want to give too much away because we do want people to buy the book, but is he the bad guy in this book, or is he the good guy, or is he both?
People are complex, and I hope that my characters are complex. And I don't think that he is the good guy or the bad guy. I think from some readers I've heard of, they're going to disagree, and I think that's for readers to make up their own minds about. But I think, I think he's a person that's gotten away with a lot, whether he realizes it or not.
I want to read one of your talking points here that's on your bio. It says, can this be construed as a critique of the tech industry?
I think in a way, right? I mean, obviously this is, these are fictional characters. This is a fictional company, but I thought it was really interesting while I was researching this book. I looked at kind of the history of women in tech and was very fascinated to see how women had gotten so sidelined in the industry. I read a fantastic book that I highly recommend called Brotopia, that's all about the history of women in tech and computing, and was very fascinated to learn that actually programming was originally thought of as women's work because it was originally sort of seen as kind of secretarial work. And then really as it advanced, women sort of got pushed to the outskirts of it. And now what everyone thinks of when they think of a sort of programmer is like a, young guy that's sort of antisocial and doesn't want to talk to anyone else. But that's the image that lives in the popular imagination, but that actually that kind of person doesn't make a good programmer in any sort of technical sense, or a better programmer than anyone else. So I think in that way, I think the way that, my character Sam gets pushed out of her promising tech career when she's young is very realistic. That is, based on a lot of things I've read and just people I've known and their experiences in these really male heavy fields. So yes, I mean, I think it can be read as a critique, but there's certainly a lot of things about the tech industry to critique that are beyond the scope of this book, I would say.
Well, I find it kind of ironic in a sense because you have traditional occupations that were always male dominated that women are playing a significant part in, like doctors, for example. Okay, there have been doctors for centuries. Mostly, in fact, always they were men, up until however many years ago, women started to go in. And now, I swear there's more women doctors than men doctors at this point. Tech is relatively new on the world stage of occupations. And yet I couldn't name one CEO that's a woman. They're all men. I find that very ironic. Why? Why is that?
Well, I mean, there's a history to it, and I would point people to that book, Brotopia, because she does a great job of unpacking sort of how that happened. But I mean, I think that part of it's just the money element, right? As soon as there was sort of big money in it, I think women got pushed out. And yeah, as I said, that happened kind of systematically. And I mean, I think it's as an interesting, sort of example that you offered with sort of women doctors. I think, as we sort of go through the decades, right, people get more used to women being on an even playing field in certain professions. But I think you sort of can't also deny that women just are sort of coming from behind on the overall sphere. So yeah, I mean, I think like it's a little beyond the scope to sort of ask how exactly did women get pushed out of tech, but I mean it certainly happened, because if you look at the numbers, it's sort of women in tech peaked in about the 1970s and then started to drop off. And so yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to think of. And I think when we sort of see these huge gender disparities in jobs, I think we always have to ask why.
Yeah, and like I said, especially for tech, because tech is so new and women have been in the workforce already. When doctors were first coming around, women
new
weren't.
And it's not it's new and it's not that new, right? Because I mean, if you look back to the history of computing, especially going back to like World War II and the Enigma machine and kind of all of those where some of these things really got their start. And again, obviously that wasn't, women out in the general workforce as much, but it's interesting to see sort of how those things evolved.
I guess for me, I'm thinking that tech started around 1995 when I got my.
Yeah, I mean, certainly like there's these huge waves of like, when people had personal computers, when we all had the internet, when social media took off. But yeah, I mean, then that has become so male dominated. And one of the other things that, that's addressed in the book is that a huge, if you're talking about venture capital funding, which, which is how all these tech companies came to be, right? If you're talking Facebook or you're talking Uber or you're talking any of these companies, was by venture capitalists. And I think something like 2% of venture capital goes to female-led startups. So, I mean, that's probably the answer right there, is that, those tech companies that were helmed by men blew up because somebody decided to give a 20-year-old male Stanford dropout, however many millions of dollars.
$100 million to start the company.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the money, right? Follow the money.
Right.
That's why.
Good point. Very good point. And on that, we got to end the interview. My guest is Andrea Dunlop. The book is called Women Are the Fiercest Creatures. Is the book out now?
It is coming out next Tuesday, March 7th.
Okay. And the last question is, do you have a website you want to give out?
I do. You can find information on all my books and all my projects at andreadunlop.net.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you and chatting with you, and best of luck. Are you going to be on a book tour next week?
Yes, I'm going to be doing some events in New York and the area next week. And
Okay, great.
That information is on my website and also on my Instagram.
Well, have safe travels and best of luck.
Okay, thank you, Douglas.